Hello, I'm Erin Somerville at McCallum High School going over Article 1 of the Constitution, which covers the legislative branch. So next to you, you should have printed up Article 1. I have it divided up in these slides with space for you to make notes to the side as well. Okay, so if we look at Section 1, it's just one sentence. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. There is a vocabulary term to describe this type of legislature. This would be a bicameral legislature. And you can see the bicameralism here in the architecture. One side designated for the House of Representatives and the other side designated for the Senate. And our state legislatures across the country have a similar architecture. The document, the Constitution, is quite logical. Article 1 is all about the legislative branch. Section 1 lays out right away that this will be a bicameral legislature, 2 chambers, a House, and a Senate. Section 2 goes over one of those chambers, Senate 3 over another chamber, and then there's more sections about other things Congress can do and cannot do, and how it works. So let's now go to Section 2, which is all about the House of Representatives. Let me see. I'm going to briefly put this down here. Okay. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. So here we see that their term, and their actual term starts in January of the odd year. So every 2 years we can elect our representatives. And that brings us to the way that we choose our representatives. It is through direct election. So to the right, you want to make sure you know these are 2-year terms in the House, and we have direct elections where we, the people, get to vote on who will be there. They do have certain qualifications. Those are in the following paragraph. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25. You must be 25 years of age. You must be a citizen for 7 years. And you have to also live in the state. That language can be tricky because of the double negatives there. So you must be 25, 7 years a citizen, and live where you are hoping to be elected from. The next paragraph, super lengthy. So I want you to pause and read through it. Okay, now that you've read through it, what we hear is about how representation in the House will be apportioned. That's an important word, apportioned. Because we know from previous lessons that membership in the House is based on population, and it's laid out here. Representatives, that would be membership in the House, and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers. So that wording there, numbers, refers to according to population. Which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, excluding Indians not taxed 3/5 of all other persons. That's the 3/5 clause. It is no longer valid since the Civil War's Reconstruction Amendments. But you can see in the original Constitution, this is evidence of the agreements made between the free and the slave states. Okay, so how do we know the population of a state? Because the framers knew if we're going to do representation based on population, we're going to have to know state populations and the country's population. So we do that through the census, and that is something that the framers had laid out here. And that starts with, the actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States and within every subsequent term of 10 years. So circle that term of 10 years. That's the census. Every 10 years we're going to recount to see how many people live in what states, and then we can decide how many representatives based on that population should come from every state. And another thing worth noting is, even if you have a really small population, every state, each state shall have at least 1 representative. So even a state with a very low population, they will get at least 1, regardless of how small their population is. And then the final listing of states and numbers says that at that time, how many representatives would come from each state, so based on the population of that time. Now, since then, populations have changed and states have been added, so those numbers no longer apply today. Okay, next clause. When vacancies happen in the representation of any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. Here, the executive authority would be the governor. So you want to make sure you know that the governor is in charge of filling vacancies. So he can't appoint somebody, call for an election, or maybe just leave it vacant if an election is soon to come. All right, and the final clause here has two parts. The House gets to choose their speaker. So what I want you to know is in that language, their speaker, we still use that language today. We have a Speaker of the House, who's also sometimes called House Speaker, and currently in January of 2016, that's Paul Ryan, who just recently replaced John Boehner, who stepped down. So the Speaker of the House, or the House Speaker, is chosen by people in the House of Representatives. They get to pick their own speaker and other officers. We'll learn what those other officers are when we look at congressional organization. The second part of this clause is that Congress has the sole power of impeachment. Power of impeachment is not the power to actually try and convict someone and remove someone from office. Impeachment is formally charging someone with a crime. So most recently, Bill Clinton was impeached. The House took a vote to impeach him, which means that he was formally charged with a crime. And you only need a simple majority in the House to do that, to impeach. Okay, Section 3. This one is all about the Senate. The Senate of the U.S. shall be composed of 2 senators from each state chosen by the legislature thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. So 2 senators from each state. That means our senators essentially have equality with each other. It also tells us that if there's 2 per state, we'll always have an even number of senators, meaning that there could always be a tie. And they get 6-year terms. But what I want you to notice is that they're not chosen by the people in the original document. They're chosen by the state legislature. So originally, you wouldn't be able to vote for your senator. Now, you did get to elect the people to your state legislature here in the capital city of Austin. And those people would choose your senator for you. That, however, is not how we choose our senators today. We now get to have a direct election, and that was changed by the 17th Amendment. So originally, the Senate was not supposed to be directly elected. That's evidence that the framers wanted this to be the more elite chamber. They got 6-year terms, and they would not be chosen directly by the people. But today, they are chosen directly by the people, as the 17th Amendment changed this part of Section 3. Okay, the second paragraph here is a bit confusing, because and pause it to read it, and then I'll explain it. All right, so what should be confusing is there are 6-year terms, yet elections every 2 years. How this works is we sort of have a rotation or staggered elections. So here in Texas, your 2 U.S. senators, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was elected in 2012. He gets a 6-year term, so he gets to hold that office till 2018. John Cornyn was re-elected in 2014, so he is in his spot till 2020, which means in this 2016 election, Texans don't get to vote for a senator because both their senators are in the middle of their 2-year terms. But in 2018, Ted Cruz's seat will be open or up, or he'll be running for re-election. And in 2020, John Cornyn, if he wants to run for re-election, otherwise it'll be an open seat. So the significance here is that the framers set it up so that this would be the more stable chamber. Because every 2 years, only 1/3 of the chamber could change. 2/3 of the chamber essentially untouchable. Whereas in the House, everyone has 2-year terms and elections are every 2 years. The House, the whole body, could change. All those representatives in one election could be voted out and new ones voted in. Whereas in the Senate, that's just not possible because of the way it is set up to be staggered like this. So your qualifications down here. No person shall be senator who's not 30 years of age, 9 years a citizen, and has to live there. So in addition to getting 6-year terms, being in the chamber that is more stable, the senators themselves have to be older, so we could assume wiser, more educated. This tells you the framers intended for this to be the more elite chamber, while the House left to be the more representative chamber. Okay, so in the House, the Vice President of the United States, so currently Obama's Vice President Joe Biden, he is technically president of the Senate. That's why he sits behind the president with the House Speaker during the State of the Union address, because he is technically at the top of the Senate. But he really has very little to do there other than breaking a tie vote. So the framers knew the vice president might not actually preside over the Senate often, since he just has to come in and break tie votes. So knowing he wouldn't be there, the Senate can choose its own officers, and a president pro tem presides over the Senate when the vice president's not there. Those other officers, we'll talk about them later, but remember the House and Senate, they kind of make their own rules. So we'll look at those officers that they've established. Coming down here to this clause, the Senate has the sole power to try all impeachments. While the House can vote to impeach, the Senate can vote to convict. This is an example of intra-branch checks and balances. In order to convict, you need 2/3 vote. So 2/3 of the Senate, 67 votes. And if you pause it. Okay, so the trial happens in the Senate. Now, if the person on trial for this impeachment is the president, then the Chief Justice from the Supreme Court comes in to preside. But in all other cases of impeachment for other officials, it is just the Senate, and no one needs to come in from the Supreme Court to preside. All right, next section, Section 4. What I wanted to point out with Section 4 is that when it comes to elections, rules about elections, times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, it is set up by each state legislature. So to the side, I want to note here that this tells us state governments determine really the rules and procedures for their own elections. We'll come back to this later when we want to understand better why constitutional amendments have been needed in order to protect certain people's right to vote. So states really run elections, and here it says specifically that the state legislature would come up with the times, places, and manner of holding elections for those elected in the U.S. Congress. Okay, Section 5. Underline here, each house may determine the rules of its proceedings. I mean, underline, box that really big. The Constitution, its biggest article is Article 1. But what's not in Article 1 are a whole lot of details about how Congress works. The House decides how they operate. They decide their officers and kind of their procedures, and the Senate does the same thing. And it says right here that each house will determine its own rules for doing business. Another thing to circle is quorum. You'll see that in the textbook reading. A quorum is would be the number required to do business, so if the number required to vote on something. And it's just a simple majority. Okay, for Section 6. Read through it, pause it, and then I'll explain what you should focus on. Okay, so what I want you to focus on is the speech or debate. This is not free speech for all Americans, but rather the framers were concerned with protecting political speech, the speech of those we've elected to the legislative body, to Congress. And so this ensures that a representative or senator speaking on the floor should not be arrested while speaking, that debate and discussion should not be silenced. So speech is sort of referenced in the original document, but not really the speech that you're thinking about from the First Amendment. So speech, particularly political speech, among our elected officials is guaranteed in Section 6. And then for this next paragraph, after you've read through it, what I want you to see is a senator or representative should not have a conflict of interest. And in order to make sure that there's no conflict of interest, they shall not, while they're elected, be appointed to other offices in the government or receive any other like financial benefits from the government. Section 7, titled this one, How a Bill Becomes a Law.